everyone and welcome back to the channel for another video. Now this one is going to be one that is not going to be a permanent fixture in my valley, but is one that I wanted to create to just kind of use the new items that we got in a particular bundle and create something really cool. So this is going to be a giant labyrinth maze using the Alice in Wonderland Labyrinth bundle that we got in the premium shop previously. Now if you didn't pick this up, if it comes back around, I would highly recommend it. I think this is one of the bundles in the shop that I would recommend to anyone, regardless of whether you're a fan of Alice in Wonderland or not, purely because the hedges in this bundle are amazing for decorating. You can do so much with them, even things that aren't like a hedge maze. You can just use these as normal fences or borders. There is so much you can do with these, so if you didn't pick it up, I would highly recommend grabbing it when it comes back around. But today I wanted to use it to create a labyrinth maze. Now I did this over 2 different sections in the Jungle in Eternity Isle. These areas were empty because this is where I'm eventually going to make like a big theme park once we get all the theme park rides, but for now I wanted to use it to create this massive labyrinth with lots of different areas to discover and explore. So let's get started. So as you can see, I used the lower lagoon area and then the area above it to create this. I was going to expand it over a bigger kind of land area just because there's so much of my jungle that is empty, because this is currently my area where I do like majority of my dream snaps and builds, just because it is empty and my main valley is completely finished. So I did want to use 2 bigger areas, so I went in and started placing out the hedges. Now a lot of this footage is going to be me figuring out the hedges. It was like a game of Tetris. I had to go in with all the different shapes and sizes, figure out how they worked best to create all the different kind of like dead ends and things that I wanted to use. So it is a lot of footage of me just figuring it out, but it was really enjoyable to try and figure out what worked best, how to create these really cool hidden areas, and also these areas that I knew I wanted to include that have quite big items included in them. So in this first section I started off by making the maze itself, figuring out where I wanted some dead ends to be, and figuring out what furniture was going to be included on this top layer and what was going to be included on the bottom layer. But starting off with the kind of hedges themselves just gave me a good idea. Now obviously this did take a lot of hedges, so during this I did have to go to Scrooge's I think at least 4 or 5 times. In the end you'll see I do move Scrooge's over so it is next to me, just because I had to keep going there and it took so long to be able to buy loads of hedges. So now in my inventory I do have a lot of hedges just unused, but that's okay. So I kind of figured out how much I would need to use, but it did take quite a lot. But obviously this isn't going to be a permanent fixture. Like I said, I am going to have an Alice maze somewhere in my valley or my Eternity Isle. I haven't decided yet, and it will be a lot smaller than this. I wanted to kind of use everything in the bundle and also some of the other Alice themed items we already have. So as you'll see, I'll start placing things in the dead ends and figuring out the general layout. Now originally in this top section I did place out a table with some decoration and all the different chairs. Now this is something I've done before in an Alice themed area. I really love making these kind of like Alice themed tables, and I'll decorate them with loads of sweet treats and things like that. I did originally have it in this top section, but later on I do move it further down just because there is a bit more room down there to be able to decorate around it, and I didn't want it to feel too cluttered up here. As I was doing it over 2 sections anyway, I knew I could spread things out, make the maze really kind of complex and weave everything in and out. So I do put it here for now, but as you'll see later I do move it around as I figure out the layout of the rest of the hedges. Now, once I'd figured out majority of where the hedge locations were in the build, I did go in and out during the building to check that I could kind of run around and it was all functionable, even though it's not going to be staying here for a long time. I obviously wanted to make it so that you can get through and figure out the limitations of these hedges and how much space you kind of need for your character model to fit through. You can fit in quite tight spaces, so if you haven't used these yet and you're planning on making some sort of maze, it is quite maneuverable to be able to get through all these different locations, which is a really nice benefit to these hedges. I feel like the box on them, the grid box, isn't very big, whereas some of the previous hedges we have in the game, in the kind of like tree and bush section, the hitbox is huge. You can't really put them very close to each other, and it means that when you're trying to build around them, you can't put things very tightly packed in. However, with these ones, I think they've absolutely smashed it by making the grid box a lot smaller, making it so that the bushes can obviously clearly clip into each other, and I just think they did a really good job of making this one really feel like you can make some really cool designs with it. Now, once I completely done kind of like the hedge design and the locations of everything in the top section, I then started moving up to the bottom section, and I kind of placed everything in here already to figure out where I wanted things to go in the dead ends, what kind of things and designs I wanted to include in here. I did go back and add some of the star path fountains into the top section, and I also used some of the old star path archways, the floral ones, as kind of nice entrance and exit gates, because I didn't want to use too many of the actual labyrinth sign ones, because I wanted them to feel quite special and show you where the like main entrance was. So I did use these ones as another alternative to kind of tie it all together, and they really fit well between two different hedges. They kind of clip really lovely, and they don't really have a very big gap in between the hitbox, so they worked perfectly. So I kind of placed those in and then started mapping out the hedge structure on this bottom section. Now in this back corner section, I knew I wanted to include the teacup ride that was from an old Star Path that recently came back in the premium shop, as it obviously is very clearly an Alice themed ride, and I felt like it was just a really nice kind of like focal point to stumble across in the maze. So I did want to create this kind of like nice bordered area. I did use one of the labyrinth signs as kind of like a display to go behind it, as it kind of just gave it a bit more structure and a bit more depth. So I did go in and start mapping that out and figuring out where I wanted the different borders of the hedges to go. I obviously do go in later and add trees and bushes and things like that around the back of this, so it doesn't look as out of place. But for now, I just wanted to get the structure of the actual hedges figured out and give it kind of entrance and exit points off of this area, so you could go in and access this ride pretty easily in here. Now, as this lagoon area down here has a well kind of like tied to this area, I knew I wanted to incorporate it into the maze, not only because it kind of has to stay in this area anyway, but also because it kind of just fits this magical maze atmosphere. So I do include that. I do add decoration to it eventually to kind of tie it all in and make it look a little bit less out of place. But I did just pop that in the space I wanted to include it, and then I figured out this big section for the tables. I decided these just worked so much better down here and it gave me a lot more room to play around with it. So I did add all of the eclectic chairs around the tables, and obviously I do go in later and add in all the food and everything, but for now I wanted to kind of map out the area and make sure it was easily accessible. Now, as I was getting to this end section of the maze in this final part of this area, it did definitely become a bit of a game of Tetris. This did take me the longest amount of time to figure out the layout of the hedges, purely because there wasn't really much manoeuvring I could do. I kind of had to just go in and use different pieces of hedge, figure out what worked, ways I could make different entrances and exits, secret areas, things like that. So it did take a lot of playing around with these different hedge pieces to figure out what worked best. I do end up obviously figuring it out and managing to get the kind of different areas I wanted to include, but it did take some time to try and make this be how I wanted it to be, so do bear with, and I do get there in the end. Now, in between all of the gaps that you obviously can't get to in the maze, I did include a bunch of the Toontown lampposts from the Star Path. These just worked really well because they just look very quirky, and the blue colour of them really matches kind of like an Alice in Wonderland theme. I just felt like they worked really well in here to go in those inaccessible gaps and bring light as you go through the maze. As well as that, in the gaps I did include some of the new clocks from the premium shop. I just felt like these obviously brought the kind of element of time into the Alice theme, and these worked really well to go in those gaps. And then after that I went in and filled in the maze with some path. I was going to use the like gem path, but I just felt like it was too overwhelming for the size of the maze. It just kind of took your attention away from being able to focus on everything else. It just became a little bit too much. So I ended up going just with a simple bordered brick path. This part was very, very satisfying because it was like I was colouring, like, you know, when you're colouring in and you're filling in the gaps, it really felt like that. Because you already had the hedges in place, I just had to like fill it all in. It was very satisfying. So I do go in and I add a brick path to the whole section that is obviously you can walk around. All of the gaps in between I left completely empty because I wanted to add in bushes and trees and things like that. So I started off with the pathway and then we go in and do that afterwards. Once I'd finished the pathway completely in all of the walkable areas, I then went in with some bushes. Now I wanted to use two of the flower bushes, the plaza one and the forest one, to kind of create these like nice pockets of colour throughout the maze and at the entrance. So in the entrance I did use them to kind of block off sections and make it look very structured, and then I did start adding them around the rest of the maze to kind of go in corners and tucked away to block off areas that I didn't want people to be able to access, and the use of these together just made it look really neat and tidy. Now in between all of the sections that you can't walk through, I do use a lot of different foliage, but for this part I wanted to just use some really simple flower bushes, create these really nice kind of like structured floral areas, and then figure out the rest of the foliage once I had done that. After that, I then started going in with trees. Now in here I knew I wanted to use a bunch of different trees in different colours and styles. Obviously to just fit the kind of like magical forest theme of Alice in Wonderland, I wanted there to be really nice bright pops of colour, really different styles of things going on to kind of give off that weird and wacky kind of theme that Alice has in general. I did keep these into the areas that you can't walk through, just so it kind of blocked out those areas and gave it a nice bit of shade and cover. I used some larger trees like the Ancient Landing ones, and I do go in with some of the base game ones as well to kind of give it a really nice covered over look, just so it didn't feel as structured and as kind of, I wanted to feel a lot more whimsical, a lot more overgrown, so those kind of gave that element into everything without blocking up too much of the walkable areas in the maze. Now once I'd done the majority of the trees, I then went in with some of the other just standard bushes. I did use a variety of colours. I used purples and reds and greens. I used everything that we have from the base game to kind of just bring a lot more colour in to tie to those kind of purple and red trees that we have around the build, and just to make it seem very magical. I do go in and add some of the Eternity Isle plants later on, but for the most part I did use a lot of the base game bushes just because they all come in such beautiful colours. I wanted it to feel very overgrown, like you've stumbled upon this maze in a forest, so I wanted to give it that really nice overgrown look without it taking over too much of the actual pathways that you have to walk around. Now around the well, I again used a lot of bright foliage, but I mainly used some of the bushes, and then I added in some ferns as well as a couple of the Eternity Isle plants. I obviously wanted to make the well still functionable, that you could access in and out, so I did have to test this, but it does work. And everything else just kind of tie it all together, just so it looked like this really nice overgrown magical well in the maze that you would stumble across. And I then added some more of the Eternity Isle plants as well as a lot of butterfly flowers around the build. The butterfly flowers just added to this kind of like forest look, and they really reminded me of the ones you'd see in the movie. Obviously these can be placed over pathway, which was why they were a massive benefit to have in here, as obviously a lot of the actual flowers that we have that we pick up in all the biomes can't be placed over pathway, so I knew these would be a really good addition to be able to use in those kind of open gapped areas as well as on the path itself. After that, I then went and added a little bit of extra lighting by adding some of the pumpkin vine lamps. These just have a really nice kind of like orangey yellow glow. So I did tuck these into some of the areas outside of the path as well as in the actual maze itself, just to add some extra colour and light. And then I started adding a lot of melted candles around the whole of the maze and all the gaps in between. Now, if you're someone who has a limited item count, this is probably not the thing for you because it does eat up that item limit for such a small item. However, as I knew this wasn't going to be a permanent fixture, I did add these all around, and when I walk around this maze during sort of like sunset or nighttime, it does look really, really nice having all of these dotted about. It just adds a little bit of extra kind of magical light and kind of reminds me as if there's like fairies or something whimsical off in the distance that are kind of lighting up everywhere around the maze. Now this is the finished maze. As we come in across the wooden bridge, you can obviously see the main entrance to the area. You obviously have a lot of foliage around to kind of make everything seem timed together. All the lampposts can obviously be seen over the hedges, which I think is a really nice touch because they just have this kind of whimsical look. And as we run around, you can see all the different hidden areas, dead ends and things like that, where you stumble across caterpillar statues and fountains and all different things that you can find in here. Obviously there are entrances and exits all over, as there's a lot of exit and entrance points in this biome, but for now I just wanted to run around the actual structure. We have some seating areas, a rustic clock tower to obviously fit the clock theme, and as well as that, one of the big focal points in this top section is the really cool Cheshire Cat topiary. This just takes up its own section because it is huge, but it is such a nice little area that leads off to some other hidden areas. I just think this topiary is gorgeous and I really enjoyed using it up here. As we exit out of there, we obviously have some more entrance and exit points. We have this cute little seating area with the figment topiary, and then we have this really cool seating area. I used the flower table from the Bonnie toy bundle that we got not long ago in the premium shop, as it just really fit the kind of magical theme. Now this is an exit out into the lower area, however I wanted to go to the main exit. So as I run back through the maze, it will take me to the kind of main entrance of the lower section where I use the actual labyrinth sign. So as we go from there, you can obviously see this is the main entrance. It looks a bit grander than the other one. And as we go in, the first thing you see is obviously the well in here with all of the foliage around it. This is still accessible. And then we have some little dead ends before we go into our teacup ride area. I really, really love this spot. I think it's such a nice area to run into. You can obviously still interact with the ride and everything like that. And we have a lot of foliage around here to kind of tie it all together and make it look really, really fancy in here. We then have another dead end with just a couple of benches that you can sit on and hang out. And as we come out of there and go past the well, we obviously head on to some of the other sections that we have in here, like the grand dining table, which obviously now has a lot of sweet treats and cups of tea on it. This is such a cool spot. I love creating these in my valley, and I really wanted to include one in here. As we come out of there, we just have another kind of designed area with a few different statues and topiaries and lots of foliage around. As we head out of there, we have our final sections with just some fountains and another little seating area next to the exit to the upper layer of the jungle. And that is the final build. I hope you guys did enjoy. As I said at the start, this is not going to be a sort of structure that stays in my valley for a long time. I actually did record this quite a while ago and I haven't had a chance yet to upload it, so there's probably things now that I could probably use that would make this even better, like some of the fireworks from the premium shop this week. There's probably things I could use, but this was filmed a while ago, so I do apologise for taking my time to get this out. But I am very happy with how this looks. I think it was such a fun build to do. Obviously it's not going to be sticking around, but for now I just think this is really, really sweet, and I can't wait to make a sort of condensed version of this on a smaller scale to be a permanent fixture in my valley or in my Eternity Isle. So if I ever do that, I will let you know and show you guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you so much for all the support on the channel, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!